Welcome to the Finding the Magic podcast, where books come alive. I'm Tricia Copeland, a fiction author and host of this show. If you love books, finding great reads, and hearing about the story behind the story directly from the authors, this is the place for you. Whether you like fantasy, science fiction, dystopian, or romance titles, I think you'll find something to love in my playlist. Listen in to discover something magical about a book or two today.
Hi, Michael.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Doing well, thank you.
Today we have Michael Hingson. Hopefully I pronounced that correctly.
You did.
Good. He is the author of at least three books, correct?
Three, right.
Three. So Thunderdog, which was a New York Times bestseller, Running with Roselle, which is a children's book, and Live Like a Guide Dog.
And we're doing this today, and it's only 101 degrees outside. So there we go.
Oh, it's only about 85 in Denver, so that's
Yeah,
not.
that's okay. We can cope.
Yes. So jump right in. Where do you want to start? Do you want to start with Thunderdog?
Wherever you'd like, we can certainly start with Thunderdog. So to give people a little background, on September 11th, 2001, I worked in the World Trade Center. I was the Mid-Atlantic region sales manager for a computer company, and I had been hired in part to open an office in New York, which wouldn't, you know what we did, as it turns out, on the 78th floor of Tower 1 of the World Trade Center. And there's where we were on September 11th when everything that happened occurred. And so I got out and hadn't even really thought about writing a book, but it was suggested to me a year later. But I didn't know anything about writing a book, and I got a little bit of help from the person who suggested it, who was George Berger, who was at that time the publisher of the American Kennel Club Gazette. And so I started taking notes, but 8 years later, still having not written a book, a woman named Susie Flory called me. And Susie is a writer. She was writing a book called Dog Tales. It was 17 chapters long. Each chapter was about a dog that did something that was worth noting. And so she wanted to write about them, and she wanted to write about my guide dog. At that time was Roselle, number 5. Well, no, actually it was, at that time, my guide dog was Africa, who was number 7. Roselle was still with us, though she was retired. Anyway, she asked if I'd tell the story, and I did. And then she paused, and then she said, "You need to write a book. I still want to put it in Dog Tales, but you need to write a book and I'll help." Well, she did, and we collaborated. Her agent, who became my agent, and she and I worked on Thunderdog, and our agent Chip McGregor found a publisher, Thomas Nelson Publishing, who was the largest Christian publisher at that time. Now Thomas Nelson is part of HarperCollins. Anyway, on August 2nd of 2011, Thunderdog was published. That was just a little about 5 weeks after Roselle passed away. But we wrote the book, and the idea was that I wanted to teach people about blindness. I wanted it to be a general book, but I also wanted to tell people the World Trade Center story. So every chapter starts with an event on September 11th that I experienced. Then we transition back to things that I learned in my life that helped in dealing with that event. Then at the end of the chapter, we come back and finish that or prepare to go to the next part of what happened on September 11th. About a week after Thunderdog was published, we got a call from the people at Thomas Nelson, and they were sounding all down and disheartened, which Karen nor I bought. But they were saying, "You got to sit down. We got to tell you something." And I said, "Well, Karen's sitting down." Of course, Karen's in a wheelchair her whole life, so they knew that. And they said, "Yeah, but you have to sit down too." Well, I was sitting already. So I finally confessed. I said, "Okay, I'm sitting." And the next words out of their mouth, "Even in its first week out, Thunderdog is on the New York Times bestseller list." So that was pretty cool.
That's amazing. And I haven't ever met a Trade Center or talked to a World Trade Center survivor. So I'm very happy that you are in among that group of people.
Well, thank you. It's we're blessed to be out, and and talking about it. The media got the story after September 11th, and then people started calling and asking if I would come and talk to them about teamwork and trust and leadership and other lessons to learn from the World Trade Center and lessons on my life. And by the beginning of 2002, I had become a public speaker. So I travel the world. People hire me to come and talk and motivate people. And I think I do a pretty good job of that. I just got an email earlier today from an event where I spoke in, when was it? My gosh, it was in May. It was May 21st, I think it was. And the evaluations were all really good. People said that I kept them not only entertained, but engaged and all sorts of things like that. So it's fun traveling and speaking, and it's what I do now to earn a living. It's kind of fun.
Well, I can imagine it would be so beneficial just to hear your story and, all the tools that you use to stay resilient in that amazing situation.
Well, yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, there are a lot of tools. We all have tools. And I think one of the biggest messages that I try to relay to people when I can is, look, just because a person does or doesn't have eyesight doesn't make them different than anyone else. And the reality is, yes, I use some tools that are different than what most people use, but there are also a lot of tools that I use that other people could use that might help their lives as well. But the bottom line is we learn to use the tools, and that helps us be resilient and be able to survive and become, as I would put it, more unstoppable than people imagine we can be, which is why I have my own podcast that I host called Unstoppable Mindset. And I know you're going to be on that in a couple of weeks. So we're looking forward to that.
Yes, I am too. Well, talk to me about running with Roselle. I think so. It sounds like she was your dog during the World Trade Center.
Correct. Correct. And Roselle, when you go to get a guide dog, the trainers talk with you ahead of time, and of course when you first get there before they assign you a dog, because they're evaluating you literally right up until the time they decide for sure this is the dog for you. And one of the things that they asked me when they spoke with me on the phone was, what do you want in a guide dog? Well, there were two things that I usually would say to trainers and still do. One was, I don't want a dog that has not been raised around cats and doesn't like cats. A dog has to be friendly to cats. We've had cats most all of my life, especially having been married to Karen for 40 years. But the other is I want a dog with an on-off switch. And what I mean by that is I want a dog that knows when the harness is on, they work. When the harness comes off, they can play, and that they understand the difference and they deal with the difference. And those are not two magical things, but nevertheless, Roselle was perfect for that and was the right dog at the right time on September 11th, needless to say. So in 2013, a friend of Susie Flores and I collaborated, Jeanette Hanscom and I collaborated to write a children's book. It was a word book, not really a lot of pictures, and it was called Running with Roselle. The idea behind it was to talk about how I grew up and lessons I learned growing up, being a blind boy and all that, and moving into life. And also Roselle growing up and how we eventually met and began working together. We don't spend a lot of time on the World Trade Center. It's really about teaching people about me and what I know and learn, and Roselle, what she knows and learns, and how we created a team. And that's what you do with a guide dog. It's all about being a team. Everyone always says, well, Roselle led you out of the World Trade Center. Balderdash, Roselle did not lead me out of the World Trade Center. I really wish people would stop saying that, because that really implies I'm just a passive follower on, and that's just not true at all. If I taught Roselle how to get out one way, or any guide dog how to get out one way from the World Trade Center, what if that way were blocked? The dogs don't necessarily know all of that, and I don't want the dog to be the decision maker. That's not the dog's job. The dog is a guide dog. That is to say, they guide. What they do is they make sure that we walk safely. It's my job to know where to go and how to get there. And I spent a lot of time around the World Trade Center, not only learning where all the emergency exit routes were and how to get from one place to another, but learned about all I could about how to get all around the World Trade Center and learned about emergency evacuation procedures and other things. And those are things that I felt I needed to know because I was the leader of an office and I wasn't about to rely, no offense to people with eyesight, but I wasn't about to rely on sighted people who might, but probably don't think about all the emergency issues and so on. So they rely on being able to read signs that say the emergency exits this way, which work until you're in a smoke-filled room when they don't work. So it was important for me to be the leader of the office because also on September 11th, we had guests in the office. In fact, I was the only resident in the office that day. We were going to be teaching others how to sell our products, and we had early arrivals. And then we had David Frank, who was a colleague of mine from our corporate office in California, and David was there to participate. But I was the only resident. So I'm the one that knew what to do because I had spent the time learning to know what to do. And that knowledge is what allowed us to escape and in a focused and reasonable way. And Roselle was very calm. She stayed focused, but she did because I was focused. We feed off each other. And
Right.
I kept looking in case Roselle suddenly started reacting in a strange way, then I would know something's going on. Or if I started acting nervous, then she's going to be worried about that. So it's really important that we work together as a team, which is part of what teamwork is all about and what I talk about.
Neat. Yeah, I have to admit I would be one of those people that would not pay attention, number one, to any of the signs before I thought I needed to. But
Mm-hmm.
yes, but when you're in charge of a group of people and in charge of an office, yes, I can see, and I've never been in that position, but I can see how that would be important. So, and I was a camp counselor at one point. So I guess I was in that setting. I knew my role, I knew what I had to do in an emergency and was trained, but unless you're put in that role, then you probably don't think about it as much.
Right. Correct. But it is what people should do. It's all about emergency preparedness. It's all about really knowing what to do. And the reality is if you take the time to learn and you take the time to know, hopefully there will never be an emergency, but if there is, a mindset will kick in and fear won't overwhelm, or as I put it, fear won't blind you. You use fear as a very powerful tool to keep yourself focused so that you know what to do, and you use your fear in a very positive way to be able to function and do the things that you need to do. It's all about creating a mindset.
Well, my husband will tell you I'm not good in natural disasters. I've been through a hurricane, a tornado, um, several hurricanes and tornadoes, and I I can get through it, but I'm very nervous, so I don't usually have that calm mindset, but kudos to
Well,
you.
but it is something that you can learn to do. And, we haven't talked about it yet, but my third book, Live Like a Guide Dog, was published last year in 2024. Started writing it during the pandemic because one of the things that I realized when the pandemic started was that I had talked for 19 years about being focused and not allowing myself to be afraid, in part because I needed to stay focused for Roselle. But the other part about it was that I realized I functioned well because a mindset had kicked in, because I knew what to do. And I realized I hadn't taught others how they can learn to control fear. So, Live Like a Guide Dog, true stories from a blind man and his dogs about being brave, overcoming adversity, and moving forward in faith, is all about teaching people how they can learn to deal with fear. And I used examples and lessons that I learned from each of my guide dogs and my wife's service dog, Fantasia, about dealing with fear and about dealing with life in general. For example, dogs are open to trust unless there's something that just completely has abused them, which rarely happens, but they're open to trust. They love unconditionally, but they don't trust unconditionally. But they're open to trust, and we're generally not because we've taught ourselves and others because of the way they behave really teach us don't trust people. And we shouldn't allow that to happen. It doesn't mean that we're necessarily going to trust everyone, but we should be open to exploring it. And if somebody doesn't earn our trust, then they don't, and we move on. If they do, hopefully also um, we have earned their trust. And again, if that doesn't happen, then you move on. But the reality is you can learn to trust, and that's what dogs do. So it takes, I think, like with me and Alamo, my current guide dog, it takes about a year to really fully develop that trust to the point where you truly trust each other, to know that you've got each other's back, if you will, and to have that kind of faith. Dogs don't do what if all the time. We do what if about every single thing in the world. I'm sure that one of the things that goes on when you're dealing with those hurricanes and tornadoes is, what if it comes over our house? What if it blows our roof off? What if, what if, what if? Rather than recognizing you don't have control over that. What you do have control over is how you deal with it afterward. And you have control over what you can do to protect yourself ahead of time from it. But if you allow yourself to just be controlled by fear, you're going to go crazy. And that's what we do all the time, which is what we need to learn not to do.
I'm guessing the right way to handle it is not like distract yourself with something else. Like during the pandemic, I just watched like fantasy shows ad nauseum.
Well, but I watched the news because I wanted to know what was going on with the pandemic, but I refused to worry about it. One of the things that my wife and I did, we mainly stayed in lockdown at home. We didn't go out often. And when packages came and so on, we would spray them, and because people and the media advised us to do that. So again, don't hide from it. Really learn how to deal with it. Well, I wasn't worried about getting COVID, and we didn't. But what I did do was understood there are things that you can do to prepare and do the best that you can. And the reality is, if COVID were to come along, then it does. But if you fret about it, all you're going to do is drive yourself crazy, and it'll probably make you more susceptible to having it.
That's very true. Well, so you've talked about a couple of take homes, like, be prepared rather than fearful, working as a team, trusting, some faith. So it sounds like you have like a whole toolbox in your 3 books that you've written.
I think what people would say is Thunderdog really talked more about what happened on September 11th, and Live Like a Guide Dog was much more of why it happened the way it did for me.
Okay.
So they're both very relevant. But the reality is that when you get a guide dog, you're building a team if you do it right. And the other part about that is a lot of people say, well, it must be real traumatic when you have to retire a dog. Well, it can be. You're right. They're right. But by the same token, I realized a long time ago that when a guide dog has to retire, that happens when the dog isn't able to do the things that it normally would. It doesn't see as well. Maybe it walks more slowly, and other kinds of things happen. And it's my job as the team leader to constantly assess and know when it's time to say, all right, it looks like you probably should retire, and then start that process. Now, when Roselle retired, we kept her, and she was we did have let's see, yes, we did have another dog. We had Fantasia, and Fantasia turned out to be the mother of my 7th guide dog, Africa. But we adopted Fantasia. We got Fantasia in 2006. But the reality is that what we were able to do was to get another dog, and um, that dog functioned as the guide dog. And the reality is Roselle did really well at retiring. One of the things that I did is, when I knew that she was going to have to retire, I started using her less and just used my cane more. Or we walked outside and did things without the dog. So I kind of worked her toward thinking it was okay not to always go where I want to go. There are things that you do, but that's my job as the team leader to make that decision and follow through. And it's not cold to do that. It is doing it because it's the right thing to do for the puppy dog.
Right. Yeah. And transitioning them so they understand that it's not such a like one day you're doing this and the next day you're not.
Right,
I can
right.
imagine they're so set in their routines of what they're doing. Not doing their routine would be cause anxiety.
Well, it does. It's more of an issue of that when the dog retires, if you do it right, they really feel very comfortable at home. Now, my fourth guide dog, Linny, and Roselle created a game. Linny had to retire pretty suddenly because she had an illness and she was able to recover from it, but she couldn't guide anymore. And she and Roselle created this game somehow between them that when I got the harness put on Roselle, Linny would try to sneak in and be the first one to get into the harness. And it was a game. She was very fine when I figured out that I didn't have the right dog and Roselle was sitting there wagging her tail. But but the fact is that it is all about preparation. That also prepares you as the team leader for the time when it doesn't work to have a particular dog function anymore. Now, like I said, with Alamo, well, let me go back. Guiding is very stressful for these dogs. They take it extremely seriously, which is why Linny had to retire. And eventually Roselle did because Roselle contracted a disease called immune mediated thrombocytopenia, IMT, which is a disease where the platelets are attacked by the immune system. Blood platelets are attacked by the immune system. And eventually, although she was able to work for a while with immune suppressants and so on, her kidney values started going out of the normal range. And so she had to retire. But even so, she had some time to transition, whereas Linny didn't. But it is my job to really control that process. And I did. With Alamo, Alamo's got years to go. He's 9. Actually, he's over 9 and a third now. And he's going to work for years and years yet because he doesn't deal with stress. He doesn't get stressed. And I also work really hard never to show stress. I want him to be as confident as he possibly can for as long as he can. He's going to do it for a while.
That's exciting. That sounds good. Well, it's been such a pleasure learning about you and your books and your guide dogs. Tell everyone where we can find you, how we can connect.
Well, I'd love to meet anyone. You can find my books wherever books are sold. They're all on Audible. They're all available in Amazon and wherever books are sold. Your bookstore can order them for you. The only thing I would ask is if people read the book, I hope, or any and all of the books, I hope that they will go to Amazon, for example, and Reddit, but Amazon's probably the biggest one. Go there and review them because, as any author will tell you, having reviews, especially good reviews of books, is extremely important because it tells other people that somebody's read the book and liked it. So please go review the books, whether it's Live Like a Guide Dog, Thunder Dog, or Running with Roselle. For me, I have a website, michaelhingson.com. That's www.michaelhingson.com. They can go there and learn about me and learn a lot, see some videos and so on. And if they go to michaelhingson.com/podcast, that's podcast singular, they can learn all about Unstoppable Mindset, the podcast that I host. And they can find that wherever podcasts are available. So they don't have to go to to michaelhingson.com/podcast, but they can go there and they can find out and see the episodes there. But they're available wherever podcasts are made available. They're on Spotify and all those places, so they can get to them without a lot of difficulty. The other thing, as I mentioned, is that I am a public speaker, a keynote speaker, and I travel and talk about everything from faith to leadership and trust and teamwork. And I even have a breakout session that I often give called Moving from Diversity to Inclusion. And the reason for that title is that if you talk to the typical diversity people, they'll never talk about disabilities. And they say, oh, disability doesn't really fall into diversity. Well, of course it does. So Unstoppable Minds. So I have this speech called Moving from Diversity to Inclusion, because you can't be inclusive if you don't include disabilities. You can't say, well, we're partially inclusive. No, you're not. You either are inclusive or you're not. There's no middle ground. And so Moving from Diversity to Inclusion talks about that. But also the podcast is entitled Unstoppable Mindset, where inclusion, diversity, and the unexpected meet. And the reason for that is that, as I said, inclusion comes first, diversity comes second. But most of the podcast is not about inclusion or diversity. It's conversations with people who want to talk about whatever they want to talk about. Like I just a little while ago spoke to a woman who, as a child, had trauma that led to post-traumatic stress syndrome, and she she had to deal with all of that, and eventually did. But we went through her story, so that's why I would call everything except inclusion and diversity as the unexpected, which is most aspects of the podcast. And I'm always looking for guests, and so people can email me and would love to talk with them about being a guest. And if they do want to find someone to be a speaker, they can email me as well. Best place to email me is speaker@michaelhingson.com. So again, that's SPEAKER at MICHAELHINGSON.com. And I will always answer emails. So hopefully people will email and come on the podcast, and they'll find speaking engagements. And we appreciate that a lot because, of course, we need to keep Alamo in kibbles. So we have to keep finding speaking engagements so that Alamo gets his kibbles every day.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah, very important.
And also your wife and Fantasia too. So we'll count them in.
Well, unfortunately, Karen passed away in 2022 in November. We were married 40 years. And so she's monitoring me from somewhere. So I continue to be a good kid. Otherwise, I'm going to hear about it. And Fantasia passed away in, when was it? I think it was 2019. So we had Fantasia for a long time as well. But they're up somewhere with each other and monitoring me from afar, or maybe not. So I got to be a good kid. Otherwise, I'll hear about it.
Well, I'm very sorry for your loss, but I'm very glad she's watching over you. I completely believe that. Michael Hingson, your podcast is Unstoppable Mindset, and author of Thunderdog, Running with Roselle, and Living Like a Guide Dog. Thank you so much for being here. And I can't wait to be on your podcast in a few weeks.
Looking forward to it. Well, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Michael. Bye.
Bye.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Finding the Magic podcast. I'm your host, author and podcaster Tricia Copeland, and I love getting behind the scenes. If you like the podcast, make sure to subscribe and stop in each week to discover new authors and books. Thanks for listening, and until next time, keep finding the magic.